The locks engaged the second her eyes opened. Nami Jude's hand was already on the door handle. It didn't move. She yanked harder, pulse slamming into her throat, and still nothing. Leather under her palms, the cold bite of metal, and under the cedar the unmistakable scent of gun oil. "You're in the wrong car." The voice came from the driver's seat, low, unhurried, close enough that she felt it more than heard it. He hadn't turned. Streetlights carved the hard line of his jaw as the city slid past the tinted glass. "I locked it," he said. "On purpose." You've ever climbed into the wrong car after a shift that broke you, or you just felt your stomach drop right along with Nami's? Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if a locked door in the dark is already pulling you in, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this one only gets more dangerous from here. 31 hours. That was how long Nami had been at Cedar Grace Memorial when she stumbled into the pickup line outside the ER, saw a black sedan idling at the curb, and climbed into the back seat without checking the plate. She'd done it 100 times before, collapse into whatever car app said was hers, give the address, sleep the 10 minutes home. She hadn't looked at the driver. She hadn't looked at the man beside her. She had simply closed her eyes, and God help her, she'd started to drift off against the window before the car had even pulled away from the curb. "Unlock the door," she said, "or I start screaming and there are 2 security guards 40 feet from this car." There were. Now he looked at her. His eyes were dark, calm, and terrible in their stillness. The eyes of a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything a stranger might threaten him with. "They're gone. So is your driver." "The one you were supposed to get into." Her stomach dropped. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing. He's parked 2 cars back, confused, probably calling his dispatcher right now to ask why his passenger vanished." A muscle moved in his cheek, not quite a smile. "You got in the wrong car, doctor." He knew she was a doctor. She hadn't told him that. She looked down at herself, scrubs, a hospital badge still clipped to her chest, Nami Jude, MD, emergency medicine stamped beneath a photo of a woman who looked considerably less terrified than she felt right now. "You can read a badge," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Congratulations. That doesn't tell you anything about me. It tells me you spent the last 2 hours in Trauma Bay 3. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "It tells me a man was brought into your ER tonight with a gunshot wound to the shoulder, and that you were the one who worked on him, and that he said 3 words to you before he went under that he had no business saying to anyone." Floor of her stomach fell away entirely. She remembered the man. 20 minutes of controlled chaos, blood soaking through gauze faster than she could pack it, his hand closing around her wrist with a strength that shouldn't have belonged to someone losing that much blood. Tell Minho, and then the anesthesia had taken him, and she'd assumed it was delirium, and she had moved on to the next patient because that was the job, that was always the job. "Minho," she said slowly. "Jung Minho." He said it the way other men said their own names when they wanted a reaction and were disappointed, more often than not, that they didn't get one. "You don't recognize it. Should I?" "No," he said, and something flickered behind his composure, brief, unreadable. "I suppose you shouldn't." "I have no idea what your friend was trying to tell you," Nami said. "I was trying to keep him alive, not memorize his last words for delivery. If you want information, you're wasting your time. Unlock the door." "I will." A promise, given the way men give promises they intend to keep eventually, on their own schedule. "After I understand what he told you." "Didn't tell me anything. He grabbed my wrist and said your name, and then he went under. That's it. That's the whole transmission." She held up her wrist as if it were evidence, the faint bruise from the man's grip still visible in the dashboard light. "I don't know who shot him. I don't know why. I don't know who you are beyond a name I've never heard. And frankly, at 3 in the morning, after 31 hours on my feet, I do not care. I want to go home." He studied her for a long moment, not deciding whether to believe her, she realized, but recalibrating, as though she'd done something he hadn't accounted for. "Not afraid of me," he said. "I'm exhausted. There's a difference." She met his eyes and found, to her own surprise, that she could hold them. "Ask a hospital administrator how afraid I am of intimidating men. I do it before breakfast." "The man you treated is named Johan," he said. "He's worked for me for 11 years. Tonight someone put a bullet in him 2 blocks from a location only 4 people know how to find, which means one of those 4 sold him out. Then ask him when he wakes up." "He's stable. He'll live." Nami crossed her arms. "You could have called the hospital instead of hijacking a doctor at gunpoint. I don't have a gun pointed at you. You locked me in a car. That's not the same thing." He said it flatly, almost offended by the comparison. "Johan didn't call me tonight to talk about warehouse locations, Dr. Jude. He called me 2 hours before he was shot to say he'd found something. Something he wouldn't say over the phone, which he has never done in 11 years, not once, not for anything that mattered less than everything. He was bringing it to me in person. He never made it. Nami went still. You think whatever he found is bigger than a leak? I think Johan has spent 6 months chasing something he never fully explained to me, and I let him because I trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts. Minho's jaw tightened. And I think the last thing he did with the only breath he had left was hand a stranger a message instead of a name, because some part of him believed the stranger would end up mattering more than the message itself. That doesn't make sense. He grabbed my wrist. He said your name. Nami frowned, replaying it, the details sharper now that the adrenaline had drained enough to let memory function. There was something else, actually. A number, 3 digits. I filed it as his heart rate at the time. Minho's whole body went taut. What number? 417. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition, then a wariness that hadn't been there a second before. A storage unit, he said quietly. One of 4 locations only certain people have keys to. So you already know where to look. I know where to start. He was already reaching for his phone, and Nami watched something in him shift from the careful stillness of a man managing a stranger into the coiled precision of a man managing a crisis. I need eyes on that unit before anyone has time to clear it out. And I need you to understand something, Dr. Jude, before you decide whether you're staying in this car another minute. He looked up at her, and for the first time all night, his composure had a crack running straight through the center of it. If Johan was killed over something bigger than a leak, then whoever did this already knows you were in that trauma bay. Whether you understand what you heard or not won't matter to them. You climbing out onto a curb alone tonight is the single most dangerous thing you could do. Rain had begun to needle the windshield, blurring the streetlights into long gold smears. Nami sat with the fear and the fact of it both, weighing them the way she weighed every impossible decision that came through her doors at 4 a.m. fast, and without the luxury of certainty. 10 minutes, she said finally. Talk fast, and unlock the door first. He did a soft, final click that seemed to hang in the car far longer than it should have. The door was open now. She didn't move toward it. All right, Minho said quietly, watching her not leave. Terms. The storage unit's lock had been forced, not picked, a detail Minho noted with a small, grim nod. Inside, a single overturned box sat in the center of the concrete floor, its contents scattered as if someone had gone through it fast and hadn't bothered to be careful. Nami knelt across from him, pulling a ledger free from beneath a stack of shipping manifests. Her eyes, trained for years to catch discrepancies buried in dense data, moved fast. Minho. These are payment records, recurring transfers, same amount monthly going back almost 2 years. She flipped further. To an account labeled JJ. His jaw went tight. Junho Jung, my half-brother. Or someone wants you to think that. She held the ledger out. If I were building you a story, I'd plan exactly this. It's too clean. He didn't answer right away. When his phone buzzed a moment later with the unit's access log, his face went hard and flat. Someone signed in 40 minutes before Johan was shot, he said. My brother. They found Junho waiting for them in the rain outside, hands raised, horror rather than guilt written across his face. He'd come to that same unit chasing a rumor that evidence against him was hidden there and found nothing. It took less than 10 minutes of Nami watching both men's faces, more than either man's words, to convince her Junho wasn't lying. By the time they left the storage facility, gray dawn was still hours off, and Minho's second-in-command, a man named Hansio, had already been quietly flagged, quietly cleared, and quietly replaced on the shortlist by a name none of them had said aloud yet. Director Moon, an old fixer who'd once handled logistics for Minho's late father and still, apparently, had a set of hands in places he shouldn't. She didn't see the wound until almost dawn, when Minho shrugged out of his jacket in the back of the car, and she caught, in the gray light, a dark stain spreading through his shirt at the shoulder. Bleeding. It's nothing. It's not nothing, it's soaking through cotton. She was already reaching for the first aid kit she'd noticed wedged under the driver's seat 2 hours ago, filing it away the way she filed away every useful object in every room she entered. Take off the shirt. I have a doctor for this. You have me right now, and I promise I'm better at this than whoever you'd call at 5 a.m. She said it without heat, the same flat competence she used on patients who tried to negotiate their own triage. Shirt, off, or I do it for you, and I promise that will be less dignified. He gave her a long look, not quite amusement, not quite surrender, and pulled the shirt over his head. The wound was a graze, ugly but shallow, stitched crudely by someone in a hurry hours before she'd ever climbed into this car. "Who did this?" "One of my men, before the storage unit." He didn't wince as she cleaned it, though she could see the muscle in his jaw working. "It's not important. It's important that you hid it from everyone in that unit tonight, including your own brother." She worked in silence for a moment, the intimacy of it settling over both of them unacknowledged, her hands steady against his skin, his breathing controlled, careful, aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "You don't like being seen hurt." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "My mother used to say weakness was the one thing my father could never forgive," he said finally, low, like a confession dragged up from somewhere he hadn't visited in years. He wasn't a warm man. He built an empire out of never once letting anyone see him bleed, and he raised me the same way, and it worked mostly until it didn't. He looked at her, something raw moving under the careful stillness. "I've never told anyone that. Even Johan. Especially not Johan." A ghost of something almost like a smile. "He would have used it against me in an argument within the week. Affectionately. But still." Nami taped the last of the gauze into place, her fingers lingering half a second longer than the task required. And when she looked up, he was already watching her, close enough that she could feel the warmth off his skin, close enough that the air between them had gone thin and charged in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Nami. Her name in his mouth for the first time all night, not Dr. Jude, not you, and something in her chest turned over at the sound of it. "Don't," she said, though she didn't move away. "What?" "Don't make this into something before we both know if it should be one." But she hadn't pulled back, and he hadn't either, and for one long, suspended second the rain outside and the danger and the 11 years of careful control all seemed to recede into something very far away. Her phone rang, shattering it instantly. Her mother's name on the screen. Nami answered, already braced by instinct for bad news at this hour, and the moment her mother's voice came through, thin, frightened, nothing like her usual steadiness, she knew she'd been right to brace. "Mom, what's wrong?" "2 men came by the house tonight." Her mother's voice shook. "Asking questions about your father, about the company. Nami, they had a photo of you." Nami's blood went cold. Beside her, Minho had gone very still, watching her face change in real time. "What company?" she said carefully, though something in her was already sliding pieces together she didn't want to look at directly. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Osa Jude Freight," her mother said, and even after all these years, even 3,000 miles and 2 decades away from it, Nami heard the old grief crack open in her mother's voice like it had happened yesterday. "Your father's company. The one that failed. Nami, they wanted to know if you'd ever met a man named Jung." Car went silent except for the rain. Nami lowered the phone slowly, her eyes finding Minho's across the small space between them. And for the first time all night, she saw something in his face that looked less like danger and more like dread. "Jung," she repeated. "As in your family." "My father's company had dealings with a freight business 20 years ago," Minho said, and his voice had gone very careful, very controlled, the voice of a man choosing each word like it might detonate. "I don't know the details." "I was a teenager. I never asked." "Jude Freight was my father's company," Nami said slowly. "It collapsed when I was 19. He never recovered from it. He died 5 years later, still trying to clear his name from a scandal that was never fully explained to any of us." She held his gaze, and something cold was spreading through her chest now, displacing the warmth of 30 seconds ago entirely. "Johan didn't grab a random doctor's wrist tonight, did he?" "Nami, did he know who I was before I ever got in this car?" Minho didn't answer right away, and the silence itself was an answer she didn't want. "I need you to be honest with me," she said, very quietly, "because right now I am sitting in a formerly locked car with a man whose family may have destroyed my father's life, and I have no idea anymore whether tonight was an accident or a trap I walked into with my eyes closed." "I didn't know," Minho said, and for the first time, real fear had broken all the way through the composure he'd worn since the moment the doors first locked. "Nami, I swear to you, I did not know who you were before tonight, but I am going to find out exactly what my father's company did to yours, and exactly why Johan was carrying that name in his head when someone put a bullet in him. I owe you that, whatever it costs me." Nami looked at him for a long moment, this man who, 20 minutes ago, had been close enough to kiss, and who now sat on the other side of a gap that felt, suddenly, uncrossable. Find out fast, she said. Because right now I don't know if I trust anything you've told me tonight. She didn't speak to him again until sunrise. Minho gave her the space she asked for without being asked twice. A guest suite in one of his properties, quiet and unremarkable, its windows facing a courtyard instead of the street. A locked door she could lock from the inside this time, which she noted, grimly, as its own kind of statement. Food left outside without a knock. She ate almost none of it, and slept even less, sitting cross-legged on the floor instead of the bed, surrounded by the boxes her mother had overnighted from the attic before Nami had even fully explained why she needed them. Her father's handwriting was everywhere. Contracts with his signature at the bottom, careful and hopeful, the signature of a man who still believed hard work meant something. Newspaper clippings gone soft and yellow at the folds. Headlines that had once ended her family's version of the American dream in 3-column inches of business section text. She read the same paragraph 4 times before it actually landed. Osai Jude Freight, once a promising minority-owned logistics firm, collapsed abruptly following a disputed buyout, with founder Marcus Jude citing irregularities he was unable to substantiate before the company's dissolution. Unable to substantiate. She remembered what that had actually looked like from the inside. Her father at the kitchen table until 3 a.m. for 2 straight years, folders stacked to his elbow, a lawyer he couldn't afford anymore, her mother quietly taking a second job at the hospital switchboard so the lights would stay on. He'd died at 54, her mother always said, of a heart that simply gave out from carrying something too heavy for too long. Nami had never let herself think of it as anything other than natural causes. She wasn't sure she could keep believing that now. The buyout paperwork had a routing number stamped in the corner, faded but legible. She stared at it for a long moment before she understood why it looked familiar, and then she was on her feet, digging through her bag for the photo she'd taken of the ledger in storage unit 417 before Minho's men had bagged it as evidence. Same 9 digits. She sat back down on the floor, hard, the folder still open in her lap, and let herself feel, for the first time all night, the full shape of what that meant. Whoever had built the fake evidence against Junho had used a real account, an account with a paper trail stretching back 20 years, to a company that had once belonged to her father. This wasn't about her at all, she realized. Not really. She was a coincidence that had walked into the middle of something that predated her by 2 decades. Or she wasn't a coincidence at all. She was still turning that thought over, unable to land on either side of it when someone knocked, not Minho, one of his men, young, apologetic, and clearly uncomfortable with whatever he'd been sent to say. "Doctor, Jude, we need to move you, now if you don't mind." "What's wrong?" "Someone's been sitting in a car across the street for the last 40 minutes. Hasn't moved. Hasn't done anything." But it wasn't there an hour ago, and Mr. Jung doesn't like coincidences. He was already reaching for the boxes, stacking them with quick, practiced hands. "We've got maybe 90 seconds. They made it with less than that to spare. Nami caught one blurred glimpse through the rear window as their car pulled away. A black sedan at the curb. Unmarked, engine idling. No plates she could read in the low light. And then it was gone. And her heart was still hammering 4 minutes later when they pulled into the next safe house, and Minho was already standing in the doorway, waiting. He looked wrecked. Not visibly, his composure was still there, still controlled, the same stillness she'd first seen locked inside a car with her 6 hours ago, but underneath it something had cracked, and it showed in the way his hands weren't quite steady when he reached to help her out of the car. "You should never have been left alone," he said before she'd even fully stood up. "I should never have let you go. I asked to be alone. I know, I let you." His jaw worked. "I told myself giving you space meant respecting what you actually wanted, which it did. It also meant I wasn't there when someone decided to sit outside your window for 40 minutes, and I don't think I am going to forgive myself for the difference anytime soon." Something in the rawness of it cracked through the wall Nami had been holding up since her mother's phone call. She followed him inside without arguing, and it wasn't until the door closed behind them, until the two of them were alone in a quiet room with gray pre-dawn light starting to bleed through the curtains, that either of them spoke again. "Need to tell you something," Minho said, "and I need you to let me finish before you decide what to do with it." He didn't move toward her. Kept the distance between them deliberate, careful, as if he'd learned something in the last few hours about the cost of closing gaps too fast without earning them. My father's attorney handled the paperwork on the buyout that broke your father's company, he said. Her name is Mrs. Cho. She still manages nearly everything I own that isn't strictly organizational property holding companies, legal filings. I called her tonight after your mother's call and asked her what she remembered about a freight company called Osai Jude. His voice had gone very flat, very controlled. She said she didn't recall the details. That's not damning on its own. It is when you know her. He finally looked at Nami directly. In 11 years, Mrs. Cho has never once told me she didn't recall a detail. Not about a shipment manifest from a decade ago. Not about a phone call from 3 years back. Not about the exact wording of a contract she filed before I was even born. She built her entire reputation on total, precise recall because it made her indispensable. And tonight, for the first time in 11 years, she forgot something. Nami felt something cold settle in her chest. You think she's lying? I think she's the only person besides my father who could have buried a company that thoroughly and left absolutely no trace connecting it back to us. He crossed the room slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, and didn't stop until there was barely any distance left between them at all. I'm telling you this before I do anything about it, because you deserve to know, and because I would rather you be furious with me for being slow than ever wonder again whether I was hiding something. Nami studied his face in the gray light, exhaustion carved into every line of it, fear he wasn't bothering to hide anymore, the same unguarded honesty that had nearly become something else entirely hours ago, before her mother's call had shattered it. I keep trying to decide if I can separate you from what your family did, she said quietly. And I can't tell anymore if that's fair to you, or if I'm just scared of how much I don't want to leave. Then don't decide tonight. His voice had gone soft in a way she hadn't heard from him before, not the careful control of a man managing a threat, but something closer to a plea, unguarded and a little afraid of itself. Stay because you choose to, for as long as you choose to. The moment that stops being true, I will open every door in this building myself, and I will drive you home, and I will not ask you to explain yourself. She didn't move away when he reached up, slow enough to give her every chance to stop him, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His hand lingered against her jaw, and for a long moment neither of them breathed, the space between them narrowing to almost nothing. His eyes searching hers for permission he seemed determined not to take without it, her pulse loud enough in her own ears that she was certain he could hear it too. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. Minho. One of his men, breathless, skidding to a stop in the doorway with the particular urgency of someone who has been running. We found him. Moon. Picked up 2 miles from here, second half of the shipment ledgers in his car. He's already talking. Something in Minho's face closed over instantly, not cold exactly, but focused. The Mafia boss reasserting itself over the man who had, a half-second earlier, been close enough to kiss her. Bring him to the East Room, he said, already moving. I want to hear it myself. He was 3 steps toward the door before he turned back, just briefly, just long enough to catch her eyes one more time. This isn't finished, he said, and she wasn't sure, watching him go, whether he meant Moon or Cho or the moment they'd just lost to a slamming door. If you've made it this far, drop a comment telling me who you think is really behind all this. Moon, or someone standing closer to Minho than anyone realizes. And hit like if that almost kiss just wrecked you a little, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. Director Moon sat in a windowless room 40 minutes later, hands cuffed loosely to the arms of a metal chair, sweat beading at his hairline despite the room's cold. He was younger than Nami had expected, mid-40s, soft around the middle, a man who had clearly spent more of his career behind a desk than in rooms like this one, and it showed in the way his composure was already fraying at the edges. He confessed almost immediately, the words tumbling out fast, eager, the confession of a man who badly wanted this particular conversation to be over. The leaked warehouse locations. The routing of information to a rival family. 11 months of quiet betrayal, he said, born out of an old grudge. A business partnership gone sour decades earlier, long before Minho had taken over anything, resentment that had curdled slowly into something he was willing to act on once the right offer came along. It should have felt like closure. Minho sat across from him, arms crossed, jaw set, and Nami watched the tension finally begin to drain out of his shoulders for the first time in nearly 24 hours. Watched something in his face that looked almost like relief. It was Nami who noticed the detail that unraveled it. "You said you were at the docks the night Johan was shot," she said slowly, cutting across whatever Minho had been about to ask next. "Coordinating the shipment handoff. That's what you told the officers who picked you up." Moon blinked at her, visibly thrown by the interruption, by the fact that the woman in the corner of the room who hadn't said a single word until now was suddenly the one asking the questions. "That's right. I pulled hospital intake logs an hour ago," Nami said. "Cross-referencing every name and number connected to this case, purely out of habit. It's what I do with charts that don't add up." She looked at Minho, not Moon, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of her. "There was a call placed to Cedar Grace's security desk at 11:47 that night, requesting camera footage be pulled from the dock district in relation to an unrelated incident. It came from Moon's private line." Room went very still. "If he was at the docks coordinating a handoff at that exact hour," Nami went on, "he couldn't have also been on the phone with hospital security, requesting footage from a location he was supposedly standing in at that exact moment. Those two things can't both be true." Moon's face, already pale, went the color of old ash. "He's covering for someone," Nami said quietly. "He's not the architect of this. He's the alibi someone built to slow you down." Minho said, and his voice had dropped to something Nami hadn't heard from him yet all night, flat, cold, entirely final. The voice of a man who had already, somewhere in the last 3 seconds, understood the answer and was only waiting to hear it confirmed. Moon didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward the door, toward the hallway that led, Nami realized with a slow, sick lurch of understanding, directly to the office where Mrs. Cho had been quietly waiting all night to hear how the interrogation would conclude. Mrs. Cho was not surprised to see them. She sat behind her desk exactly as she had for 11 years, spine straight, hands folded on the blotter, silver hair pulled back with the same precision she brought to everything else, as if she had been waiting for this particular conversation since long before either Nami or Minho had been born. A single folder sat squared in front of her, already open, already prepared, the paperwork for the Osai Jude buyout laid out like a hand of cards she'd decided, finally, to show. "Been slower than I expected," she said to Minho, without looking up from the folder. "Your father would have found this 2 days ago. He always did have less patience for sentiment getting in the way of accuracy. You buried my father's company." Nami's voice was steadier than she felt. "You destroyed my family, and you let my father die believing it was his own failure." The first time, Mrs. Cho looked up, and her gaze moved over Nami with the same cool, assessing precision she might have given a contract clause she suspected of hiding an error. "I finished what your father's business partner started, Doctor. Marcus Jude was collateral, unfortunate but necessary." She said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse than if she had. There were things buried in those freight manifests that could have exposed arrangements far larger than one man's company, and I have spent 30 years making certain nothing from that era ever surfaced to touch this family again. "Johan," Minho said. His voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous, quieter than Nami had heard it all night, even in the storage unit, even standing over his own brother demanding an explanation. "Was he collateral too? 11 years, Mrs. Cho." "He was 11 years old when my father brought him into this house. You watched him grow up in these halls." Something flickered behind her composure. Not guilt, Nami realized, watching closely. Irritation. The particular irritation of a meticulous woman watching a carefully constructed plan come apart at the seams because of variables she had failed to account for. "Johan found the routing numbers 8 months ago," she said, "and unlike every other loose thread I have managed in 30 years, he refused to let it go. I tried to redirect his attention toward Moon and later toward your brother. Either would have kept him occupied long enough for me to finish clearing what remained. He was more persistent than I anticipated." Her eyes moved, finally, to Nami, cold and clinical. "And then he found you. Marcus Jude's daughter, working 20 minutes from Jung Minho's usual hospital contact. I had been keeping a distant watch on your family for years, Doctor, in the event any of you ever surfaced with old paperwork that mattered. I never imagined you would simply climb into the wrong car." "You didn't engineer that part," Minho said slowly, something shifting in his expression, not relief exactly, but the beginning of it. No. Something almost like amusement touched the corner of Mrs. Cho's mouth, brief and cold. That, gentleman and doctor, was an accident I could not have designed if I had tried for a decade. I only made certain that once it happened, Moon was positioned to slow you both down long enough for me to finish removing every remaining trace of what your father and I did 20 years ago. Her gaze moved between them, distaste crossing her face for the first time. I certainly never predicted you would fall in love with her. The room went completely silent. That wasn't the plan, Minho said quietly, and Nami understood, watching the flicker of something almost fragile cross his face, that some part of him had been genuinely afraid of exactly this answer. Afraid that whatever he felt for her had been manufactured somewhere along the way, engineered by forces neither of them had ever controlled, a variable planted rather than chosen. No, Mrs. Cho agreed simply. It wasn't. Minho's men took her out a few minutes later, calm and unresisting, still composed even in custody, as though composure were the last thing she intended to surrender. Nami watched her go and felt no triumph in it at all, only a hollow, aching tiredness, the particular exhaustion of finally understanding a wound that had shaped her entire family and finding no comfort waiting on the other side of the understanding. They found Johan awake 2 hours later, propped up in a hospital bed with color back in his face for the first time since the trauma bay, an IV still taped to the back of his hand. He looked smaller than Nami remembered him from that frantic night, smaller and somehow more at peace, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for months and had finally set it down. I recorded something, he said, his voice still rough from the tube they'd pulled that morning. The night before I was shot. In case I didn't make it back to tell you myself. He nodded toward the phone on the bedside table, already unlocked, already queued to the file. Play it! I've been waiting 6 days to know if you'd ever hear it. Minho sat down slowly on the edge of the bed and pressed play. Johan's own voice filled the small room, tired, low, recorded alone somewhere late at night, the hum of a car engine faint underneath it. If you're hearing this, something happened to me before I could explain it properly, and I'm sorry for that. 11 years, Minho, and I've never once seen anyone get past your walls the way this woman is about to. She doesn't even know it yet, and honestly, neither do you. I don't know exactly what Cho is planning. I know she spent years making sure you stayed isolated, because isolated men don't fall in love, and isolated men are easier to control. Whatever happens to me, don't let fear talk you out of the one thing she never planned for. You've spent your whole life protecting people by keeping them at a distance. Try protecting someone by letting her close instead. See what happens. Recording ended. The room stayed quiet for a long moment, nothing but the soft beep of the monitor beside Johan's bed. He knew, Nami said softly, her throat tight. Before either of us did. Knew me better than I knew myself, Minho said, and for the first time since a locked car door 6 days ago, something in his voice broke all the way open, unguarded in a way she had never once heard from him. He reached for Johan's hand, the same hand that had grabbed Nami's wrist in a trauma bay, 3 digits and a name the only thing he'd had time to give her, and held it for a long moment without saying anything at all. They didn't rush the rest of it. It took days for the full shape of Mrs. Cho's decades of quiet damage to surface. Buyouts, buried contracts, a dozen smaller cruelties Minho hadn't even known his father's empire had committed. It took weeks for Nami's father's name to begin the slow, unglamorous process of being cleared in the records that actually mattered, a process that would never undo what those years had cost him. But that mattered to Nami's mother in a way that made her cry on the phone for the first time since the funeral. And it took longer than either of them wanted to admit for the fear to fully drain out of the space between them. The fear that what they felt had been manufactured somehow, that a locked car door and a dying man's last message had built something neither of them had actually chosen for themselves. But Minho stopped hovering. Stopped sending men to trail her car for her safety without asking first. Stopped, slowly and visibly, needing to control every variable within reach, and started instead, awkwardly at first and then with growing ease, simply asking. Dinner, he said, 3 weeks later, standing on her doorstep without a single bodyguard in sight, hands in his pockets like a man who had genuinely, for the first time in longer than he could remember, no idea whether the answer would be yes. Just dinner. No danger, No locked doors, you're allowed to say no. You're really asking me this time. Nami leaned against the doorframe, fighting a smile she didn't fully try to hide. Not telling me, not deciding for me and calling it protection. I'm working on the rest, he said, and it was the same thing he'd told her weeks ago in a different doorway, but this time there was nothing guarded in it at all, just a man, plainly and simply, hopping. She got into the car willingly this time. No rain. Morning light instead of 4 a.m. shadows. And out of pure habit, 6 weeks of instinct she hadn't quite managed to unlearn yet, her hand found the door, she checked it. Unlocked. She looked over at him, and he looked back, waiting not for permission, not for control, just waiting. The way a man waits when he has finally learned the difference between the two. Nami smiled and closed the door herself. If a mafia boss learning to trust instead of control hit you right in the chest, let me know in the comments what part of tonight's story stayed with you. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe, because Nami and Minyo's world is only just getting started.